he gets up and he proposed a toast. And he said, Mr. Speaker, if I had a ticket to heaven and you didn't have one too, I'd throw mine away and go to hell with you. Now, can you see Pelosi and Trump doing that?
No.
This is Court Winnicky, a Marine surveyor living in Seattle, Washington, and you are listening to the Vance Crowe Podcast.
Dr. Barry Flinchbaugh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I actually shouldn't say welcome because we're in your office here at K-State University. Tell me, what is it that you do here? You have your own space. Are you teaching? What are you doing these days?
Well, I'm semi-retired. Have the title emeritus, which I think is an awful title, but that's what they do to you when they put you out to pasture.
Put you out to pasture.
But I still teach the course I started in 1970. Next fall will be my 49th year teaching the same course. And they tell me if I make 50, which I'm going to, that'll be a record at the university. So it's a course in agriculture policy, primarily for juniors and seniors. And we cover the main issues that agriculture has to deal with. Right now, of course, trade is front and center. I started in 1970 as an extension specialist.
Now, for people that aren't familiar at all with the agriculture world, what do extension specialists do?
It's called the Cooperative Extension Service, and it's in every state. It's at the land-grant university, and basically they take the university to the people. We do the research, and we take it out to the farmers. And we've branched out. Of course, we do community development, and my wife, for example, was a home economics specialist many years ago. So it's not only for the farm business, it's for the farm family. And
that term, home economics, got kind of turned around. I mean, when I was growing up, for anybody to be involved in home ec was like you were taking the class on how to manage your checkbook, but it seemed so beneath us. But now you look at the world and you say, most people don't know how to do that.
That's right. And of course it's gone through all kinds of different titles, and for a while we were human ecology. Now it's health and human services. But it's basically, as I've joked many years about, the difference between teaching in the countryside and teaching on campus is that on campus the professor flunks the student, in the countryside the students flunk the professor.
That's very insightful.
If you're going to keep farmers' attention and work with them and teach them something, you need to be on the cutting edge. Historically, when I was fully employed, I had a 80-20 appointment, 80% extension and 20% teaching that undergraduate course. I've dabbled in administration some. I was the extension state leader for ag economics for 20 years. I spent 4 years as public affairs assistant to the president of the university. I did the lobby work in Topeka for those 4 years, etc.
Wow.
So, I've dabbled in all kinds of things, but always came back to agricultural policy.
So you have this big, thick, gray beard,
yes,
and you've got this slight voice, but you are a booming voice in agriculture, very, very well known. How is it that came about? Because so maybe just to set the stage, I met you at the Wisconsin Corn and Soybean Expo, and for people that don't know about agriculture, there are commodity groups that get together that say, we want to think about the future of our grain trade, about how we should market our grain, sell it into the market, how to prepare for new technologies that are coming. And they invite speakers like you in to say, help us understand how we should prepare for the problems with China or what's gone on with NAFTA, those kind of things. But there are many people out there that are speaking, but very few of them have the booming voice. How did you build a reputation to the way that you have now?
Several things, I think. Number one, from the beginning, I did not shy away from controversial issues. I hit them head on. I put it on the table. I didn't tell farmers what to do. I explored with them what their options were and what the consequences of those options would end up being, and then they could decide. But I played the role of an educator, and humor played a very heavy role in it. I had a speech teacher at Penn State many moons ago. She was a graduate student, and she taught freshman speech. She also was Miss Pennsylvania, so she had my attention. We freshman boys all sat there with our tongues hanging out, you know.
Didn't miss class.
Didn't miss class, no. And the first day she wrote on the board, a light moment every 5 to 7 minutes. I never forgot that. And then she explained that, and if people are smiling or laughing, their mind's open. If they're frowning, they're mad, their mind's closed. So if you're going to tell them something that they need to know but they don't want to hear, you got to humor them. And I've always thought the humor that they always appreciated the most was self-deprecating humor. And I can tell all kinds of stories about little short, fat Pennsylvania Dutchman. And they get a big kick out of it, or something like it, you know. Or if I pick on one of them, I pick on myself too. And
well, so you'd be interesting. So during the talk that we both gave talks. You gave one in the morning, and I gave one in the afternoon at lunch. And I brought up the idea that humor is tribal in a way. It defines who are we and who are they, because when you laugh at a joke, what you're really doing is you're connecting two pieces of disparate information, and the comedian shows a way to make a connection between those two things, and that ha 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 sound is the social signal that tells the people around you, I understand that connection. Did you agree with that point? What did you think about that?
I do agree with that. And every story I tell, I don't like the word joke very well. I don't tell jokes, I tell stories. And they're funny. But they make a point that will teach the audience something I want them to learn.
How did you develop the repertoire? You throw them out like cards, like you have no issue pulling them out. It seems like they're right there for you, thousands of them.
Well, I made my first speech as a high school student in Future Farmers of America. And I also did it in 4-H. And standing up in a high school assembly as one of the high school students may be the toughest audience I've ever had. You know, to keep their attention, you have to almost hit them with a sledgehammer. And, they were my peers, so to speak. So I started when I was 14, and I had the toughest audience of my life right at the beginning. And, they made farmers look easy. on the road, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd much rather speak to a group of farmers, even farmers that are not happy with me, than I would be to speak with high school students or even college students, because they're easily distracted, and if they don't like what you have to say, they've got other things to do.
They just close their mind.
Do you remember what jokes you told when you were 14 years old in the FFA?
Well, I used the first speech I ever gave was called Porky Pig at His Best. I was in the hog business. Hogs paid my way through college. Showed hogs all over the East Coast, and the minute I got up there and opened my mouth and said Porky Pig at its best, they laughed. Now, you have to be pretty self-confident to do something like that. You can't be arrogant, but there's a big difference between self-confidence and arrogance. Self-confidence is based on fact, arrogance is based on the figment of your imagination. So, and I built on that theme and told them about how raising pigs was going to pay my way through college, which it did. And I just built on that. And then it was, I was the first Flinch ball to go to college.
Really?
Yes.
What were the other ones doing?
Farmers.
They were all farmers?
Yes. And there's not many of us. It's a very unusual name. There's probably 500 of us in York and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was just understood I was going to go to college. I'm a product of a one-room school, and I adored the teacher. I had the same teacher for 8 years. She's probably the best teacher I've ever had.
You were in one room and you had the same teacher for 8 years. That would seem in today's age to be the Stone Age. I mean, it would seem like a very long time ago.
It was in the 50s. And she, my dad had her too, by the way. And if she couldn't teach it to you, she'd pound it into you. She was really tough. And then I went to, in high school, I had several teachers that I remember well and revered. Then I went to Penn State twice, once for bachelor's and once for master's, and then to Purdue for PhD. And I had 2 or 3 professors each place that took me under their wing. And after 50 years of teaching myself, almost 50, there is a well-kept secret to it. If you truly give a damn about each one of those students, and you can't fake it. Some professors try it and they don't get away with it. But my students know that if they're in a mess at 2 a.m., they call the old man.
Have they ever taken you up on that?
Oh, sure. I've went downtown and got them out of jail.
Really?
Well, sure. You know, they got drunk in Aggieville and took a piss on the street and got caught. So somebody had to get them out of jail, you know. But those professors at Penn State and Purdue, they gave a damn about me. They cared what happened to me, and they guided me from one step to the next. People said, why did you come to Kansas? Growing up in Pennsylvania and going to school in Indiana, how did you end up in Kansas? Well, the old professor at Purdue had a student here that was a professor here by the time I came on, and they just decided I was coming here. They didn't tell me. I came and interviewed, but it was all cut and dried, I found out later, because they gave a damn about me. And I do the same thing for my students.
You know, I'm often struck, when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I think I might have mentioned this at the talk at the Corn and Soybean Expo, that if you go away to school and you don't know, you are very vulnerable to having someone indoctrinate you with ideas. Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. I mean, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do from maybe 10th grade on up. I was going to be a university professor. I started out in animal science. I couldn't quite figure out what I wanted to specialize in. And then I switched to agriculture economics. My dad and mother lived in fear that I was going to be a politician because I've always liked politics.
Well, you're okay with having an opinion that other people don't agree with.
Oh, sure. And agriculture policy merges political science and economics. And as an educator, I can, that old alternative consequences model where, you know, here's the problem, here are the alternative solutions. Research shows here are the consequences of each of those solutions. Now we got to apply value judgments in politics and come up with a policy. And if you're a policy educator, you don't have to get caught up selling your soul to one political party. And I've never done that, and that's really important today because we've become so politicized and so polarized, and we got to go back.
The challenge in economics of not partitioning yourself to one party or another is that the parties are, at least it seems to me, to be divided along economic lines, right? One saying free markets are the best way to achieve the largest amount of good for the largest number of people, and the other saying regulated markets allow us to have a government that's strong enough to protect the vulnerable. And those seem like divergent things that never will meet. How is that just a vast oversimplification?
Well, I don't know if it's vast, but it is oversimplified. And what the current administration has done is flipped it.
Tell me more about that.
I can make you a list of issues of where the Republican Party stood before Trump and where they stand now. One of the things I said in Wisconsin is we're adding $1 trillion to the deficit, federal budget deficit every year. Does anybody give a damn?
No, and in fact, they don't care so much that when I put this out on Twitter, because I thought that was a profound graph that you showed. If you send it to me, I'll put it into this podcast. And they said, that doesn't matter. You know, that's an old way of looking at economics. We don't. That's not correct. What do you say to that?
Well, they're full of bullshit. They don't understand economics. Deficit is a deficit. And at a very minimum, a deficit has to be serviced. Yes, the government prints money, but they have to borrow to back it up. And you got to pay interest on borrowed money. You own a savings bond, you're helping fund the federal debt. And you don't buy that savings bond just because you're such a good citizen and you want to help fund the debt. You expect a return. Now you'll take a lower return because it's the last thing to go down would be the federal government. Anarchy, so to speak. But I've got a brand new grandson, 2.5 years old. Only one I got.
Congratulations. Only
grandchild. The old man when it happened. And I feel awfully guilty because I'm passing that problem on to him.
Yeah, the line, the sins of our fathers will be visited on the son, seems to me to be right here. And you know, we can say, hey, we get to keep grinding out and living in the way that we are, having the government structures that we are, but the legacy that you'll leave if you leave that debt will be the children that hate their ancestors because they left them with a pile of ash.
Yeah. You know, Grandma and Grandpa love their grandkids, but they're consuming for them.
Say more. What do you mean?
Well, we're borrowing money for our consumption that they're going to have to service, or at a minimum, preferably pay it off, but they're going to at least have to pay the interest on it. And I mean, that's just someday, and I won't predict when because I don't know, but there is an end to this crap if we don't clean it up. I mean, it's $1 trillion a year we're adding to the federal deficit. We're doing it under a Republican administration, and we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan and Papa Bush are rolling over in their graves because they stood for fiscal sanity. They stood for a balanced budget. And that chart you looked at, really interesting. There was a balanced budget in there 4 years.
That's right.
And you know who was president?
It was Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. He and Newt Gingrich believed in old-fashioned politics where, like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, it fought like hell from daylight to dark, and then you partied together. And you weren't enemies. You were opponents.
You said something the other day that has been rattling around in my brain for the whole week since we spoke. I think it's one of the most important things I've heard in a long time. And I'd like you to talk about the genesis of where you heard this, but it was the concept that you fight with enemies, but adversaries make you better. You don't want enemies, you want adversaries. I think it was to do with the FARC and the Colombian president?
Yes. Right before I came to Wisconsin, the retired president of Colombia was here on campus. We have what's called a Landon Lecture Series. It's named after former Governor Alf Landon, and he was governor of Kansas in the 30s. He ran against FDR for president in 36, didn't even carry Kansas, but he's a great statesman. And this lecture series has been in effect since 1966. Harvard's jealous. We have a better lecture series than they do. Every president since Nixon's been on that lecture series.
Wow. While serving as president or after?
No, not enough. Some was in, like Papa Bush was here when he was
probably all the better.
president.
They can't say much when they're president. When they're not president, they can say stuff.
We had the President Santos from Colombia, who won the Nobel Prize. He inherited a country that had 50 years of war and had this rebel group called FARC. And I mean, people, God knows how many people were murdered. But he brought peace. Santos explained how he did it. And he traveled the world studying the peace process, how you make peace. And one of the things he said, and I've often thought about this, but I never articulated like he has. He said, I convinced FARC that they weren't my enemies. They were my adversaries. And if we learn and understand that we're better off, all of us, if we make peace, we'll do it. And he got it done. And he went, and after he said that, I thought, gee, I've been hunting for 30 years how to explain that, and he did it in.
It's brilliant in the sense that when you consider the other side to be your enemy, then you'll do incredible things in your mind to who they are and what their intents are.
Yes.
But when they're your adversary, then you can view it as, we can climb over this mountain, and if I get over this mountain, I'll be better. It doesn't mean I have to run the mountain down.
Yes.
That was really helpful to me, because I have a natural tendency to simplify the world by making things black and white, and I want people to either be on my team or the other team, and that allows you to have a middle ground.
I've taught a lot of Kansas politicians on both sides of the aisle, and some pretty famous names, like Bob Dole, for example.
He was one of your students?
No, but not in the classroom, but outside the classroom.
You knew him?
Oh yeah, I know him well. I rarely go to Washington. I don't stop and see him.
Oh.
And he's 96 or something like that. Can't hear, he can't see, and he can't walk, but other than that, he'd say I'm in pretty good shape. And, when he and I started to work together a little bit in the early 70s, he had the attitude that if I wasn't for him, I was against him. And I explained to him that an educator's role is not to choose up sides, but to put the facts out, to destroy the myth, and help everybody understand things better. And then, Senator, if I do that, it's going to help you. Because I wished I'd have said, then, they're not your enemies, they're just your adversaries. And he, I can see him yet buying that concept. And he and Teddy Kennedy, for example, worked very close together in the Senate. And he tells the story that he was majority leader and Reagan was president. And the history book is showing Reagan had a really good head on him. And he was majority leader, Reagan was president. And he goes over to see Reagan, and he was pretty down because he wasn't getting anything done. So he thought. And he said to Reagan, I can't put your program through the Senate. And Reagan said, none of it? And Dole said, oh, no, son. Not no. We'll get some of it done. Well, how much? And Dole said 75%. Reagan said, that's a hell of a lot better than 74. Now get out of here and get it done. You see, that's what the president of Columbia was saying, too. You have to compromise. You have to understand that even though you and I don't agree on something, we're not enemies. We just have a difference of opinion. One of us is probably wrong, but we don't overthrow its swamp.
It's interesting when you're embroiled in a controversy or in a situation, because you start to believe that anybody that leaves your camp, they're an apostate. And I remember thinking that we were in unique times as far as how tumultuous the government was and how much people hated the president, until I went to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, where they have a hall that you walk through, and they have all the editorial cartoons, and they hated him.
Oh my, yes.
And they were every bit as vitriolic to him as what you see today. So the question that I have is, are we compromising less than we did in the past? Why does it feel like right now we're on the precipice?
Well, we are compromising less than any time in my lifetime. Now, that doesn't mean that we're compromising less than any time in the history of the country. The time that we compromised the least was when we went to war, Civil War. The 20 years before the Civil War was terrible.
20 years it was up to that.
Well, we had 4 presidents. 4 before the Civil War that only served one term.
We never hear about that in the history books.
No.
You just hear about Lincoln, conflict, Civil War.
Yeah, we had 4 presidents that were one-termers before Lincoln. And Lincoln he got reelected, but then, of course, was shot shortly thereafter. And we're still paying for that today.
You really think so?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me more.
Well, the civil rights battle would have been, it's probably never going to be settled, but it would be much less vicious than it is today.
If we hadn't had the Civil War?
No, if Lincoln hadn't have been shot.
Oh.
Andrew Johnson was a disaster, and we were enemies, where Lincoln understood enemy and adversaries. Lincoln and Grant understood that the quicker we bring the South back in, the quicker we treat them as citizens, the better off we'll all be. And I mean, Lincoln had it all thought out and was ready to read his second inaugural address. Malice towards none was the main theme.
I feel way out of my depth here. I'm now realizing that my understanding of the Civil War is like paper mache version of the statue that really is there, because I know almost nothing about it, and I grew up in the land of Lincoln. I mean, I knew about the battles, and I knew about Gettysburg, and I knew we treated them badly all the way up to the end of the war, but I didn't really consider that after Lincoln was shot that
we went back to treating them badly.
I never realized that.
We never, they were. If Lincoln would have lived, they'd have gotten the vote in his second term.
That would have changed things.
He was a genius, and he was very much a humanitarian, and people would follow him. And then he had the most, his sense of humor was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. It even transcends time.
Yes, well, he could, we were talking earlier about humor in a speech. If you see the audience getting nervous or frowning, it's time for some humor. And that relaxes them. Then they open their minds. And that's why, by the way, that gal's name was Savage, Miss Savage. And I lost track of her. I wanted to tell her how much she taught me and what my speaking fee was and stuff like that, you know. And I'll never, ever forget what she taught me. And because it works.
You know, you're describing having people guide you and be your mentors, and I can think of many in my life that taught me things that you're like, I use what they told me there every day. Did you ever mess up along the way? Did you ever give advice?
Did I ever what?
Did you ever give advice or give some guidance that now you look back and you think, ugh?
Oh, yeah. Well, I told you I did the lobby work for the university for 4 years.
Yeah.
I was an absolute disaster at it. I hated it with a passion. Because
why? You're in politics, you're in agriculture, economics?
I was born to be an educator. I firmly believe that. And yes, there's some education in lobby work. But there's also, it's pretty hard to describe. But
horse trading.
Yes, but it's not all honorable either.
Okay.
And I have a hard time, even though it might help my cause, of teaching people stuff that isn't true.
Or letting them come to conclusions knowing that they're not looking at the full picture.
Yeah, or, playing on their ignorance. It's the system needs lobbyists. Don't misunderstand me. And there are a lot of honorable people in the lobby business. But it's ripe for, and horse trading don't have to be dishonorable, but it sure can be. I wanted to go back to the classroom awful quickly.
So, as the consummate educator, what is the thing that you really wanted to impart on these juniors and seniors in this class that you had that would prepare them to be a part of the world?
Well, I wanted them to understand the political process and how to participate in it. I wanted them to be able to separate fact from myth, because you see, in the political world, fact and myth are identical, because myth is what people think is fact, but it isn't. A lot of Kansans think we have the highest sales tax in the country. We don't. It's fifth, I think. It's too damn high from a value judgment standpoint, but it's not number one. People think that sales taxes are regressive. They hurt poor folks more than wealthy folks. Well, yes, but they don't have to. You can exempt the basic necessities of life. Food, clothing, shelter, health, and take the regressivity out of the sales tax. So things like that are fairly simple to understand if somebody will take the time to explain it to you. And the system will function. The political world isn't based on efficiency, but it is based on, and at the end, as the decision's made, it's based on factual information, and the decisions are made by honorable people. And you got to work in that direction. Santos, when he was here, said at the end there was one word that guided him through the whole process, and that word was compromise. And two of my students were sitting on either side of me, and one of them said, "Don't let your buttons pop off," because that's just what you taught us. See, that made my day.
Yeah, of course.
There's two ways to make public decisions: compromise or dictatorship. There's nothing in between.
That's interesting that those two are the dichotomy.
Yes.
I think a lot about dichotomies.
Yes.
And try and say, if you have one concept, what is its equal and opposite
Yes.
force?
Yes.
And you told me this the other night about compromise and authority, and you're right. The challenge with compromise, though, is that the herd, the large group of people, Nietzsche said that they will always try and gravitate towards equality where then no single man can rise up, and then you don't have the great works of art, and you don't have the great, because greatness comes from one person separating away and building something that was very difficult they had to do alone. And so when I think about this compromise and authoritarian, I think it's easy to imagine a soft world where compromise is the best, but you can also imagine where this individual force in the world also allows great things to be produced.
Well, we throw the term around benevolent dictator. The only benevolent dictator I've ever known is me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you're not, you know.
No, I don't want that kind of power. In fact, I'm very afraid of getting that level of power.
Yeah, you see, so compromise does not prohibit greatness. In fact, the real great political leaders have been the great compromisers.
Who are some of the great ones in history that you reflect back on and think are particularly interesting?
Well, in my lifetime, I clearly, the greatest one would be Harry Truman.
This is another one. I have no idea anything about his backstory. I could barely pick him out of a lineup.
He was a piece of work, let's put it that way. If you go to Kansas City and you go on, I forget what street, but you can go past his haberdashery where he went broke.
Making hats.
Haberdashery.
Isn't that a hat maker?
No, that's a retail clothing store.
Okay.
It's what he had, and they called it a haberdashery.
Okay.
He and Eddie Jacobs had it together, and they were soldier buddies. And of course, Eddie was Jewish, and Harry was, I believe, a Presbyterian or Episcopalian. I can't remember which, Protestant. And but they were good buddies. And of course, Harry was he recognized the state of Israel within 24 hours after they were formed. And he always said that was, you know, Eddie wouldn't shut up if he hadn't done it. So, but then he told Eddie, no, I'm not flying their damn flag over my capital. You know, so, but he was a Missouri farmer. He farmed for 10 years. He was an accident. But he understood human nature. And he had lots of fortitude. He made the toughest decision any president's ever made, and that was to drop the atom bomb on Japan. I personally asked him when I actually spent some time with him when I was a college student. I personally asked him why he did it. And his answer was, in war, there's no such thing as men and women and kids. It's all human beings. And if I hadn't dropped the bomb on Japan, there'd have been a lot more American soldiers killed, and maybe if they would have invaded us, there'd have been a lot more women and kids killed. And so I had to draw the line. And if I'd have let the thing go on without dropping the bomb, there'd have been a lot more people killed, a lot more Japanese killed. And he was very comfortable explaining it.
My mentor, he's this 99-year-old man. He lives out in Manhattan in New York, and he was on a ship. He had already deployed in the European theater, but they packed him up, and then he was headed for Japan when Truman dropped the bomb.
Yeah.
And he later met a kamikaze pilot who said the same thing that Pete had said for all those years. Pete said, Truman hadn't dropped the bomb, I'd be dead. And the kamikaze pilot said the same thing.
Yes, exactly. And I learned to know Truman's nephew fairly well. He's gone now. His name was Harry A. Truman, and he was a farmer on the Kansas-Missouri border. And I looked out, and I was doing an extension meeting there, and looked out, and I thought, my God, there sits Harry Truman. I mean, this guy was a spitting image of the old man, and I went up to him, and I told him that I thought he was Harry Truman. He said, I am. I said, what? He said, my name's Harry A. Truman, and he was my uncle. And he was at Potsdam. He was in the German theater, and when the president went to Potsdam to meet with Stalin and Churchill, he brought his nephew from the field into Potsdam. And then when the conference was over, and basically when they divided up Europe, which is what they did at Potsdam, Harry took his nephew to the airport, and Harry came home on a ship. And young Harry was coming home to get married, and then was going to be shipped out to Japan. And he said to his uncle, the president, you don't know how I dread going to Japan. And the president put his hand on the nephew's shoulder and said, son, don't worry, nobody's going to Japan.
Whoa.
And then they parted. And so that, the decision to drop the bomb was made the night before.
Wow. You know, it's one thing to make the decision, but I struggle to even imagine what it would be like to go from not having that power to being handed that awesome power.
See, and he didn't know it. He didn't know the night Roosevelt died, Oppenheimer, who was one of the developers, briefed Truman. And Truman had no idea there was an atom bomb being developed.
Oh my God, that would be, I never realized that.
It dropped right on his lap.
It would be like giving the power of the gods of Zeus, not just in the fact that you're now president, but now you have this awesome power in the most terrifying of ways. You know, and if you think about the situation that we got into in World War II came as a result of not being able to forgive the people from World War I.
Exactly. They were the enemy, not the adversary.
That's right. And
Santos is right.
I mean, even France's armaments and the way they prepared for World War II was all a hangover from the rage they felt over World War I.
Yeah.
And it was a bad war, and people did real bad things in World War I. But that was like an infant. If you think about modern society developing consciousness, you know, as we've developed stronger and stronger armaments, we didn't suddenly become more mature. We just had people out there that were now able to inflict vastly more harm. It's like a boy reaching puberty before his mind has, and he becomes vicious and violent. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, and by the way, Ben, Harry Truman never went to college. And is in the top 5. And no matter what list you see from historians, he's in the top 5. But
for the viewers that don't know, I've got Ben over here. You can't see him; he's off stage. But he actually was my driver to K-State. He's an exceptional guy, and we were having a chance to talk with him before. Ben dropped out of school to start an app company. I'll have him on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, you should do that.
He's a very clever guy.
Yeah, you can tell that.
So,
but you know, I heard about he never went to college, but he read every book in the Independence, Missouri Public Library.
One of the greatest gifts that the gods or whatever can bestow upon a human being is a love of reading.
Yes.
Because if it's not a burden to you, then you can go and discover wisdom that would have otherwise taken you a lifetime to learn.
Yeah, one of the real traumas I'm going through now is I'm losing my eyesight, and I can't read very well.
Oh.
And it doesn't, listening to it is not the same as reading it.
Yes.
I'm learning to listen to books, but it's a struggle.
What makes it a struggle for you?
Well, when I'm reading something and I want to think about it, I stop. Where you got to reach over and turn a damn machine off, and then you lose your place on the. It's just not. You lose control.
Right.
So to speak.
One thought I have for you is they make headphones now. Yes. I don't know if you listen to that when you take it out, it pauses it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's. I used to struggle with this. I'm the same way. I was a voracious reader, and then I started to realize that the advent of podcasts and audiobooks is the equivalent of Gutenberg's printing press, because now you can have ideas that used to be only accessible to those that were both literate and wanted to read, and now they could listen. But I take your point, like there are certain books, if I'm trying to read philosophy, for instance, where I'm not just trying to crank through the story, I'm trying to understand the concepts. It's very difficult. My brain processes it differently when I listen to it.
I can still read, but it's very slow. So my mind gets ahead of my eyesight.
And describe that for me, because I don't know what it's like to have my eyes grow old. Is it that you have trouble focusing on the letters?
No, I have what's called dry eyes, and I don't make enough of tears. And so then it gets foggy.
Be very frustrating.
Yeah, now if I pick this up and I have light behind it, I can read it. But then I look up and look at you, and if I didn't know who you were, I'd wonder. You see, because there's a fog in between.
It's.
I don't drive, for example, anymore. It's not safe. I ran over a student 2 years ago.
Everything okay?
Oh yeah, I just scared the hell out of him. But
so we think about it's easy for us to point out, and it's probably time immemorial of what happens to the human body as they get older, right? People as they get older, your eyes are getting dry, or you maybe struggle to walk. What were the things that happened to you getting older that you didn't expect that was positive for you?
I think I have better judgment. There is such a thing as wisdom, and wisdom comes with age. Now, some people are wiser at 20 than others are at 80. But on the average, you're wiser at 80 than you are at 20, because you learn from experience. Also, and I don't find this with all my fellow old boys, I'm more tolerant than I was when I was 20.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm more willing to listen to the other person's point of view. Each day the world gets more as I learn more, the world gets more complex. Learning's tough. If you're ignorant, life's easier, at least for a while.
Well, it's like taking on debt, right?
Yeah.
You can do it for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But you will pay the bill at some point.
That's right. It's like a federal deficit.
That's right.
Chickens are coming home to roost someday.
So I want to go back to politics a little bit, because you and I had a conversation, and everyone sitting around us was shocked at something that both you and I knew, which was the senators in the United States, state senators that get sent up to the federal level, used to be selected by the legislatures and not the voters.
That's right.
This is an interesting thing, because right now what we have are two sets of elections. You either vote for your representative, your U.S. representative, or your U.S. senator, and the U.S. senators get put there for 6 years. And as far as the public can tell, it's like we vote for two guys for 6 years and a bunch of people for 2 years. But that wasn't set up that way. How was it set up before?
Well, it's always been 2 and 6. But the 6 was not a public decision. It was once removed from a public decision because the legislature elected the senators,
Right.
not the public. And they didn't serve as long a time. They still had 6-year terms because that's in the Constitution.
Those roles were much more, you were supposed to have been a professional that then the government says, you represent our state. The state government says, we want to send you there for 6 years. You're going to go there. And the reason they had 6 years was so that they didn't have to be accountable to the whims, the constantly changing pressure of the voters. Let the U.S. representatives represent what's going on right now, and the senators go there and say, represent the state's interests. And in my opinion, and I'm sure there were valid, good reasons for doing it, but if you think about this in a hypothetical exercise, having a group of people that are serving at the federal level that are just responsible to the state itself means that you keep that federalist republic. You keep the idea that the state is separate from the nation. And if you go this other way, we're all just one large country and the states have minor differences.
The House is called the People's House. But now the Senate's the People's House too, except it's just, you live there longer.
Yeah, you have more power.
Yeah. And, I catch myself. There's nothing I dislike more than to hear people say, well, we never did it that way before. Or the good old days. If we, I'm diabetic. If I was in the good old days, I'd be dead. So the hell with the good old days. But you learn things from the past. And so I don't like to talk about we need to go back there, but we need to learn some things. I want a speaker and a president that behaves like and works like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who were as far apart politically as you could get. But they were good friends. They were fellow Irishmen. And they worked together. And I heard Senator Monahan tell the story one time. He was a Harvard professor and a U.S. Senator both, which is unusual. And he was an authority on how to take care of old people, Social Security, etc. And he went over to see Tip one day, who was the liberal Speaker of the House from Boston, and said, if we don't do something, Social Security's going to go broke in between 7 and 9 years. And as Monahan told the story, Tip picked up the phone and said, Mr. President, Monahan's in here, and he says Social Security's going broke. We don't want that to happen under our watch, do we? Oh, no. Get over here. So Monahan and O'Neill goes over to see the president. Within an hour, they had appointed the Greenspan Commission, went out in the Rose Garden, and Tip said, whatever they come up with, the Democrats will back, and Reagan said, whatever they come up with, the Republicans will back. Social Security is still solvent for 30 years. That's the way the government's supposed to work.
What changed that made it so that it doesn't work that way?
Well, but political scientists will debate that forever. Some say it goes back to Watergate. Others say it goes back to, we'll never know who won the 2000 election. And the Democrats think that the Republicans stole it. The Democrats also think that they were paying the price for getting Nixon. And this just made it more polarized. Others blame it on social media. We don't know. Political science are going to study that forever. But we've been polarized before. So it gets back to when we were talking about pre-Civil War. We can work our way out of this, but we got to want to do it. And again, it gets back to humor. We've lost our sense of humor. Trump doesn't shake Pelosi's hand at the State of the Union, and then when he's done, she tears up his speech. Now, as a grandpa, I'd like to spank both the 2-year-olds. It's and the great story about Reagan and O'Neill, when Tip turned 75, Reagan had a birthday party for him at the White House. And
you would never see that now.
Oh, no, God, no. And it was a big party. And Reagan got up, and he was as clever as, he could turn a phrase better than, there just wasn't anybody better at it. And a lot of them were original with him. The more we study him, the smarter he gets, by the way. And he gets up and he proposed a toast. And he said, Mr. Speaker, if I had a ticket to heaven and you didn't have one too, I'd throw mine away and go to hell with you. Now, can you see Pelosi and Trump doing that?
No. No chance.
Now, Tip and Ronnie were adults, not 2-year-olds.
Yeah, and they're, for all of the challenges that large corporations have, I've had a chance to be in the room with executives, and the corporations that run the best are the ones where you have people at the top that are adversaries, intense adversaries, extremely disagree with one another, and yet they walk out of there arm in arm. It's happy-go-lucky. And I see the same division that happens right now in politics going on in corporations.
Yeah.
And I think
it's part of the human element now.
Yes.
It goes on right here.
I think in part, and your thing about saying we've lost our sense of humor, in a big way, I think it's because people feel a calling to their tribe to be puritanical, to the extent that, any deviation from the group means that, you're an apostate. Not only should we throw you out, but everything that you've done is no longer even considered a part of your historical record.
Well, and people say all those damn politicians do is compromise. They got a yellow streak up their back. They used to say that. Now they say they won't compromise.
Right. And they claim they want them to, but to want them to means they have to be willing to give up on your side.
Yeah, you got to give.
So in this world of puritanical views, this is something I wanted to ask you. You have a very edgy sense of humor. You're right there on the edge with the things that you say, that I think if I said what you said, I would face tremendous pushback. It's not that you're sexist or racist or anything like that, but you say things that are edgy. You're looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, here's the reason.
Because you have gray hair.
That's right.
And I could see that. People assume good intention.
See, my younger colleagues will say to me, how do you get away with telling farmers what you tell them? I said, well, number one, I just tell them the facts. And if I screw up, I admit it. If I don't get it right, I tell them. But they know I've spent all these years on their behalf, that I've worked hard with them, and that I wanted them to succeed. And, I'll tell them sometimes, I respect you too much to feed you a lot of bullshit. I'm going to tell it to you, not the way it is, but the way I think it is. I could be wrong. My wife says her husband is often wrong, but never in doubt. And so farmers respect that. And, you know, occasionally it even surprises me what I get away with. And I'll say to somebody, I don't understand how I get away with that. And they'll all say, respect age.
Yeah, and I would say you're probably right. I wouldn't have thought of this as a part of it, but you are telling people things they don't want to hear.
Exactly.
At least in the room that I was in Wisconsin, those were farmers that were not hearing, hey, you're protected forever and things are going to go well and look at the green pastures ahead of us.
I told them the facts.
Yeah, and I think that somebody that's willing to do that to a group of people and get them to swallow that medicine, that's so rare, it's so unusual that they respect it more.
Now, ironically, I did that when I was his age.
So it's...
And I was always, you know, the first 10 years around here were pretty rocky.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What price did you pay for being honest?
Well, I don't think I paid a price, because I had a president and a dean that stood behind me. But my first assignment here was to teach farmers the tax issue. The state was in a real uproar over taxes. And farmers were absolutely convinced that they were paying too damn much property taxes, and professional people weren't paying enough income tax. And everybody argued taxes were too high. The first thing I said when I did 300 5-hour seminars in 3 years.
300 5-hour seminars? My
Across this
God.
state. Was every county 3 times. And first words out of my mouth were, my taxes are too damn high, but I don't know about yours. And that loosened up a little. They got a little itchy. And then I said, that's not, if we argue for 5 hours whether taxes are too damn high, we're going to need 10 and we still won't know anything. What's the problem? And that's the first thing you do when you are a public policy educator. You've got to get the problem defined accurately. The problem was, what should the tax mix be to pay for government? How much from property, how much from sales, how much from income?
And how much should they be forced to cut? Or how much should they be, the government
Well, no,
be?
I just did taxes.
Okay.
And I assumed that what they were spending was acceptable, because I didn't want to argue about spending. I wanted to teach them the tax situation.
Okay.
Now, that's another issue. How much should they spend? And I laid it all out. You got the property tax 10%. How much you got to increase the sales tax or the income tax? Who's paying the property tax? Who's paying the income tax? But I never once told them what the proper tax mix was. And within that 3 years, by taking the hottest issue in the state and leveling with them, my wife said to me one night, and she's very astute, do you realize how much you get away with? And she had just been to one of the meetings, and she made a critical comment about what I said, and some old farmer tackled her. I'm sure his finger at her, you know. Now, you listen to what he says, he knows what he's talking about.
Wow.
And he's got the guts to lay it on the table. Somebody handed me a note in Wisconsin. I don't know who it was. Didn't sign his name. He handed it to me and took off. And I almost got tears in my eyes when I read it. It said, "Thanks for being honest." That's all it said.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
What else could you want from somebody
No, you couldn't.
to be grateful for your honesty? That's
Yeah,
to be grateful for the best gift that you have is your honesty.
And people, especially now, and I see a turn. I mean, when the great red state of Kansas starts to turn a little blue, and that's not a partisan statement. If it was when California starts to turn a little red.
Change means something.
Yes, but we elected a Democrat governor. Now get this. This is the great conservative state of Kansas. So-called narrow-minded farmers. We just sent a congresswoman to Washington who's a Native American, lesbian, married and has 2 kids, and has a law degree from Harvard, and is also a veteran.
Wow.
Now, my California liberal friends, they think I'm lying to them. And I say, go check.
Was she a Democrat then or a Republican?
Oh, she's a hard Democrat.
Yeah.
And tougher nails. She come in my office one day and told me she was going to get elected. And I told her she's crazier than hell.
Really?
Yeah. She's never let me forget that either.
Good for her.
I mean, when she told me who she was, I just...
So when politicians come by through here, it's because they want to know about agricultural policy?
Yes.
So somebody sits down here, they're from the city, they've had an Ivy League education, they're not familiar with agriculture. How do you lay this out for them?
How do I what?
How do you lay out agriculture for them? I mean, you only have an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. What are you trying to get done?
I basically tell them how risky agriculture is. And I'll start with the weather. And insects, and then I end with, and then there's the politicians that set policy that the farmers have got to live within. And that's what you're all about. And I tell my students the first day, I feel sorry for you because you've got to sit through 30 of these damn lectures. And we can sum this all up with one 4-letter word. Of course, they won't be getting to, they wonder what's that 4-letter word. And then I'll say, well, it's clean. It's called risk. There's no occupation more risky, really. When you look at and now not only do you have weather risk, you had political risk, now you've got international political risk because we export 25% of everything we produce. And people that don't, I just had Senator Roberts is retiring, which is, he's 83, I understand it, but God help us, because we're turning in 50 years of seniority. And he's the only person ever chaired both the House and Senate Ag committees. And I mean, he knows exactly what he's doing. And I just read the thought, but, and we got, everybody and his dog wants to take his place. And, I just had a young lady in here the other day that she doesn't know a bull from a steer, but she's smart. And I got more done in 2 hours than normal.
Yeah, that challenge that not knowing a bull from a steer, and that just is the very, very, very tip of the iceberg on agriculture. And the people that are setting the policies for how most of the land in the United States will be utilized, what level of education do they have? How sophisticated is their thinking as they set up this policy?
Well, they learn. Most of them have goodwill. I still defend politicians. I think they pretty much reflect society, and they want to learn. I helped teach Mike Pompeo ag policy, for example. He's now Secretary of State. And one of the things Pompeo said to me when I was working with him is, well, I know what you did for Glickman. Where do you think I'll end up? I said, I have no idea, but I think you'll be in the headlines. And I never dreamed he'd be Secretary of State.
Yeah, wow.
And, you know, I don't necessarily agree with his policies. I didn't necessarily agree with Glickman's policies, but that's irrelevant. Having the ability to teach people like that is awfully rewarding. And now you turn it the other way. I tell my student assistants, now that kid back there is dumb as a stone, but he's working his butt off. And you're going to work your butt off to help him. Now that kid over there is smart as a whip, but it's majoring in Aggieville, which is the beer place downtown. And you don't need to help him. He won't take your help anyhow. Now, one of the most influential students that I ever had in ag policy, and I won't name him because it's, I don't have his permission to do it, but I gave him a D so that he could graduate. And he is a very influential ag lobbyist today. And as I told his mother 100 times, he will grow up. And he has.
Wow. You get to know your students' mothers at times.
Well, yeah, a lot of them.
I don't think any of my college professors did. My graduate school was different, but
No.
that's great. That's
Well, I had to, because I went to the countryside in Extension.
Oh, so you would have had people coming up to you saying, my son's in your class.
Oh, sure, it happens all the time.
Oh.
Yeah. Or what are we going to do with this?
Do you think that as I'm listening to you talk about extension and the fact that you had to be on the front lines as probably something that kept you much more grounded as a professor, kept you out of the ivory tower?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't like that term, ivory tower.
Yeah, because you don't want to be in it, or because you don't think it's true?
A lot of it's not true. And it ridicules basic research.
Okay.
I don't want to do basic research, but I sure as hell want people doing it. It's got a good head on them.
And you think the university system research is important in light of private research? That
Yes,
you could
because we don't have we only have one axe to grind here. It's called education. We're not selling any product. Our function is to educate the kids of the state of Kansas and the farmers and so forth. And we can be objective. That doesn't say we always are, but we can be. Where when you're selling pet food, by doing research on pet food for science diets, you can't be objective. Because your job is to sell science diet.
Yeah, and I studied diplomacy in graduate school, and they used to always say, where you sit at the table determines where you stand on issues. And I always thought that was a clever thing. I don't think money corrupts absolutely. I know many science researchers, but I can imagine that if what you want to do is keep doing research sitting in your lab, and what it takes for you to do that is to not tell the news straight, but to give them what they want to hear. That could probably happen.
And that's why we're going to have a debate fairly soon. What's the role of public education at the college level? The USDA research budget that goes out to land-grant universities, if you discount it for inflation, it's probably a tenth of what it was 50 years ago. And that's being substituted by private research. Now, there's a role for both, but the real basics requires complete objectivity. And you can't be objective when somebody with an axe to grind or a product to sell is paying the bill. You see, when I first started doing those tax meetings that I talked about, the county agriculture agents in each county would put them on. And they're part of Extension also. And they would say, well, I'll get a sponsor. And I don't want any damn sponsors. This is a university function. We'll pay the bill, or we'll charge admission. But I'm not going to have a Farm Bureau sponsor it. Then that's going to piss the Farmers Union off. You know, you gotta, there's a certain part of it that's got to be uncorruptible.
I know this feeling myself because I worked for Monsanto, and I absolutely never stood up and said anything I didn't believe. However, there are definitely things, I'm good enough at dancing on a stage that if somebody asks me a question, that giving my real answer is going to cause problems. The temptation to avoid giving true answers there is too great because you've got your family and your insurance and you know, you used the 4-letter word before, risk. You know, by taking the risk to go out on my own, the thing that I bought with that risk
was freedom.
Terrifying, completely scary freedom. But
that's
it's there.
Why I'm a college professor.
Do you think college professors feel free? You seem rarefied air.
Pretty much. It's getting. We're losing some of it.
To what?
To private enterprise because the public don't want to pay the bill. Too much basic research is being done by private enterprise.
Interesting. What was done by the public that's now done in the private?
Well, from an economic standpoint, or from an ag policy standpoint, there is less analysis, basic economic analysis, being done on farm programs, for example, by universities, and more by farm organizations. And wheat and corn like to fight, you know. I'm surprised that to see that corn and soy keep having that expo together.
You're surprised by that?
Oh yeah,
that's because they pair off. Like
yes.
they're not. That's not. You're not giving up. You know, if you do wheat and corn, you're right. Those do compete. But
corn and soy compete too.
Yeah.
Not as much. And I often joke with Nancy, how come it's not soybean corn? And she says it rhymes better corn first.
Yeah, I bet that's funny. So,
it's rare. You don't see much of that.
I've never seen that before, actually.
Actually, I think that may be the only one.
The Wisconsin Corn and Soybean Conference, Expo. That may be right, and it probably is. Nancy is an exceptional person.
Oh my God!
I ran into her. I met her years before, and she was just a little lady sitting on a bus that I sat next to on a tour of a farm. And that's, you know, I talk about this quite a bit, and I wonder if you feel the same way. I used to just talk with people randomly on the bus or on the plane because I was bored, and I'm extroverted and I like it. Now I get the sense that every single person that starts a conversation with me is like a character in a movie that you think it's a throwaway line, but you better listen because it might be on the test later. Yeah. And I've become almost obsessive about, like, if somebody starts to say something to me, I turn and because something like Nancy, I met her for 20 minutes on a bus. 4 years later, I run into her, and she introduces me to you, and she's excited to introduce us, but it's only because we had a conversation 4 years before on a bus for 20 minutes.
She told me about you before I came.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. So I want to give you a chance to give a 5-minute crash course on what people living in the city should think about when they think about agriculture. I mean, you can go longer than 5 minutes, but we've got a little bit of time.
Well, there was a city. Yes, there was a city. There was a book written one time by Willard Cochran, who was a professor at the University of Minnesota in ag economics, and it was called The City Man's Guide to the Farm Problem.
The City Man's Guide to the Farm Problem.
And so this is not possible, but I wish they could all read that book.
I have a book club. The podcast reads a book every month.
I'll have them read that.
All right.
It's in the library somewhere.
Okay.
It's old, but it's still...
That's the point of the podcast, the book club. We're trying to read books that we wouldn't ordinarily read.
Okay. And he was a very brilliant ag economist from the University of Minnesota. But what he tried to do with that book was to get people to understand the risk.
The risk of farming.
And that the only thing more important than food was water. And to really, actually, you have to obviously have both. He also taught that that doesn't mean farmers should have special privilege. Now, some farmers tend to think because they produce food, they should have special privilege. Or they love this, they have this sign, don't cuss a farmer with your mouth full, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I don't like that kind of stuff. That's too negative. So you need to get people to understand what it's like producing your food, what goes into it, and it's not just soil and water and air. It's very scientific, and one of the things I've told farmers a lot of times to get them to kind of calm down and think logical is, or to listen to me. If I ever lose my voice, I'm going to starve. Because all I need to do is be able to talk and understand economics. They need to be an animal scientist, understand how to raise animals. They need to learn how to conserve the soil. They need to be an agronomist. They need to be a climatologist to try to handle the weather. It's very difficult, but they got to work at it. Then they got to be a marketer, because what good's the stuff if it isn't marketed?
And most people living in the city don't understand what marketing is. That you actually have to, not only do you harvest that corn, you have to decide when am I going to sell it. Am I going to sell a futures contract and I'll owe you that? So that's a certain amount of risk, or it may be hedging risk.
Exactly.
Or are you going to store it in bins, pay somebody else to store it, and then sell it at the right time?
Or
you got to be your own stockbroker, essentially.
Or you're going to convince the government to store it, which the government does sometimes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
For our strategic corn reserves?
Yes. Or strategic food reserves. We used to have, we had a big argument years ago when my old professor, Earl Butts, was ag secretary. With too much government storage, so he sold all the government's bins. And that ended the government storage, so he thought, but then Jimmy Carter come in and he paid the farmers to store the government grain in their bins. So, when there's a will, there's a way. But, and now to top it all off, you got to be an animal scientist, an agronomist, soil scientist, etc., climatologist, a marketer. Now you got to understand politics. Not only domestic politics, you got to understand international politics. Because it's all part of this ball of wax. That's why there's damn few dumb farmers left.
Yeah, I think farmers are more than happy to let people think that they're not very bright.
Oh, yes.
And it's why you and I were talking. I gave a talk, and somebody gave me a little bit of a hard time about it. They were like, "You gave a college lecture here," and
you did.
And I was like, "These people are prepared to handle some very intense topics, and nobody came up and complained to me."
Well, and that bunch that came up to you, they tried to take you deeper.
Yeah, that's right.
I listened to part of it sitting there at the table.
That's right. They had their own philosophies and
Exactly.
ideas, and they wanted to explore them.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, you didn't talk over their head.
People, when I tell people what I do, because I live in the city and I'm around a lot, I know that they don't understand that there is an entire ecosystem, a huge, all across the country, of people that are farming, and that these are sophisticated business owners that run multi-million-dollar operations. They're not liquid. They can't just go around and spend money like they're multimillionaires.
You got to be a financier.
That's right. Your own bank, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you just keep adding it. And now, because the family farm has to hire labor, because mom and the kids can't do all the work on a big farm, you got to know how human relations and how to deal with paid labor.
That's right. And running your own human,
It just keeps coming and coming and coming.
There's an interesting, I've been studying St. Louis recently because I wanted to know the namesake of the city that I was in. I talked a little bit about that on the podcast, or in the presentation.
Yes.
But one of the things that I wanted to look up was St. Louis was known for having the lords that held over the land, that had the peasantry, having them come to his castle, and then they had to respond to the poor. So the poor that would come to the gates, he would send those people down and talk with them. And I was like, I wonder how rich those people were. So if you were a lord in the time of Louis IX, how much land did you have? Do you have any idea?
No.
1,200 acres.
1,200, that's all?
That's all. But think about what you would be managing in 1225 or 1235. 1,200 acres, you'd have a whole bunch of people, right?
Man, you'd have a ton of people.
And what we've changed out, the farmers are lords now. I'm afraid to tell them this because I don't think they'll like it, but they've changed out human capital for physical capital, the tractors and things, but they are running the same tracts of land now. I mean, there are a lot of farmers farming 1,200 acres, right?
Oh, that's average.
Yeah. Well, I think technically the average is 200, but that includes all those little...
That's the federal definition.
Right.
All you need to do is sell $1,000 worth of agricultural commodities and you're a farmer.
Because they want to count all of them.
So every 4-H kid that has
every FFA kid that gets the final badge and the...
Yeah, sure, they're a farmer. Well, and farmers want that too, because we want them to think, I mean, there's very few of us left, 2.1 million. Now, 800,000 produce 85% of the production, but we have 2.1 million farms by the federal definition. That sounds better.
It does sound better.
Yeah.
I think we talk about the transition going on in China all the time. They moved more than 50% of the people living in the city now living in the country now live in the city. But we did that.
Oh, sure.
From 1940 to 2020, we went from 40% being on the farm to less than 2%. And I don't think that society can change, culture can change that fast and have it be stable.
I joke with farmers that the culture has kind of merged, because you got that satellite TV out there, and you can see, and you get the Playboy channel just like they do in town. And of course they don't watch it, but they can get it.
That's right.
Yeah, that's bullshit too. So, but anyhow.
But there is a values difference.
Yes.
The people living in the countryside aren't doing that by accident.
Though that's because it's riskier.
I really hadn't thought too much about the fact that the only way you could be in farming is if you have a high tolerance for risk, which would make it...
Absolutely.
I never thought about that.
I never... people say, why have you been a college professor all your life? Well, it's the only occupation, probably, that I can think of where I can be who I want to be and say what I want to say and not get fired or not lose my ass because I have tenure. Now people say, oh, you shouldn't give these professors tenure, they get old and lazy. Well, I'm still teaching at 78. I don't think I'm old and lazy. And yeah, some people get tenure and retire when they shouldn't. But I'd have been fired a dozen times if I hadn't had tenure, probably.
You really think so?
Well, that may be stretching it, but I've had a couple deans that I didn't get along with, and I told them where to put it. You know, I've had one president that I didn't get along with, and I helped get his butt fired.
Really?
So,
when you say that, is it because you're a political animal? Are you?
Oh, I'm a political animal, but not a partisan political animal. He was screwing us.
Okay.
He needed fired.
That's true, right? That's the part about politics. I had, for the last few years, I completely eschewed all politics. I said, it's too much chaos for me, it's too much noise. It doesn't seem to altogether that different to me than WWF wrestling, watching what they do on television. So why?
But that's rigged.
Yeah. But it seems like they're all just playing a giant game and they want the bravado. But you have to be aware of it. It was foolish of me to think you can have no involvement in politics, because really that just means you're getting drug around by the politics.
Well, are you and I going to interact with each other? We're involved in politics.
That's right.
So politics is how men and women with a different values live together in a civilized society. And I'm worried about the civil part. I mentioned the president not shaking the speaker's hand, and then she tear up his speech.
Right?
That's not civility.
That's right.
That's not how adults behave. And I don't want my grandson to see that. I don't want him to look up to something like that.
How have your students changed over time? Do you see them as...
Oh my, yes. I've got the best students I've ever had.
You really mean that?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me more.
Well, first of all, they care. Somebody taught them empathy. And I have a theory that it was their parents that taught them and why they taught them. But my parents taught me empathy. But between my generation and this generation, there wasn't a lot of empathy taught. It was more rugged individualism. Nixon's mom taught him, you got to get them before they get you. For example. Now, Papa Bush's mother and dad didn't teach him that, and he didn't teach George W. that. Barbara taught him to be honorary, but not to be, W had a little difficulty showing it, but he cared. And today's students are, just compared to 5 years ago, they work harder, they attend class more regularly, they can ask more questions than a country lawyer, Now, I have a unique relationship with them in a way. I tell them the first day, and I get accused occasionally of being too crude, but I'm going to bust my ass for you, and therefore you're going to bust your ass for me. I say that in the first 5 minutes, and they, who is this old fart, But I have their attention. And they discover day one, and they know my reputation, that I give a damn about what happens to them. And they give a damn about what happens to me. I mean, they know I'm getting old and tottery, and they help me in and out of the classroom. They'll get a hold of my arm, or they'll, I see them on the street, they want to know, could they help, or how far do I have to walk, or...
I mean, this is the most hopeful thing that I've heard anyone say. When you started this and you said they have empathy, I fear empathy, because empathy is the thing that can lead an individual that doesn't have self-worth. I think a wrongly placed empathy can say, it's better for me to give up my destiny, my desire to exert ideas into the world to try and make something different happen, and I'm going to give myself over to this mass movement, because this mass movement, we care about things. We care about animals more than other people. We care about the environment more than other people. To me, that's always been an expression, I've only recently come to these conclusions, and it may not be right, but that an overabundance of empathy can lead a culture towards collectivism, where we're only caring about the feelings of others as opposed to striving them to do better.
Now I'm going to pull age on you. I'm 78. If I've learned anything, it's one thing. I have never seen a problem or an activity or a feeling or a philosophy, etc., that a good dose of moderation won't solve.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can be empathetically extreme, or extreme empathetic, I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
Society that works operates between the 40-yard lines. Decisions are made, philosophies established, facts are separated from myth between the 40-yard lines, not in the red zone. If you do it in the red zone, you won't get in the end zone.
Yeah.
You gotta make the decisions in here.
That's the Overton window.
Yes,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
And between the 40-yard line can be viewed as moderation, and the red zones are extremes. Now, I look out at those 20-year-olds, and this past year I told them I was 77. And I said, now you won't believe this at 20, but that's true with sex too.
Oh, moderation.
Yes. he won't believe that.
No.
But you're starting.
I'm getting to the point.
You're starting. You see. Well, that brings the humor in, and they get it.
It would, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's. I sleep good at night because I know that generation's going to take over. That is a very good generation.
I mean, this guy Ben, we wrote in here. He told me how hard he works, how he thinks about things.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, see? That wasn't true 10 years ago. Now, the Great Recession taught him some. Because, you could graduate from this institution with a 2.2 10 years ago and get a pretty decent job. That's harder to do today. And the president talks about all this job creation. Well, most of those are low-paying jobs. We've got unemployment at historic lows, but we're still only growing at 2%.
Well, one area that definitely has demand for jobs is agriculture,
Yes.
and that's I'm so glad that you are teaching. I can barely describe it. This is I'm so glad that we met and that we had a chance to do this.
Me too.
And I just want to thank you for taking your time to sit down and do this. This has been wonderful.
When you told me you want to do this, I come home and bragged to my wife. I said, that guy wants to do a blog with me, and I've never done one, or a podcast. And because I don't know those terms. And so I got a
your flip phone.
Flip phone, and you can't get them anymore. So when it goes, I don't know what I'll do then. But anyhow, she has a smartphone, and she tells me all the stuff that's on it. And I tell my kids in class, now that's a dumb phone, but if I catch you with a smartphone on, that thing's going to get awful damn smart.
Well, you were an excellent guest, and I'm just so grateful that you were willing to do this.
Well, I'm honored.
Well, if I swing through Kansas again, Manhattan, I'll come by. Thank you.
As long as you bring Ben along.
I think I will. This is good. Thank you.
You bet.